The Myth of Aldez, written by Stephen Trifiletti. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that. I am not a smart individual. This book follows the adventures of our titular protagonist, Aldez, a young boy with a heart of gold, an adventuring spirit who spends his time practicing his swordsmanship, going on adventures, and doing odd jobs to make some money. And one day, he receives a missive, a summonings from the Marquis, or Marquis, because his name is Marquis, but people called him the Marquis, and he's just dealing with that. He gets a summon from Marquis to do a specific job, and Aldez is like, this is going to make some bank. So he shows up, and the Marquis is like, hey, by the way, you're the chosen one. You need to do some quests to get prepared because we got a big storm coming. That's our setup here. Now, this is a book inspired by Legend of Zelda, and it kind of wears that on its sleeve a bit. I mean, it's in the title. Legend of Zelda, Myth of Aldez. It's written in plain text. Our inspirations are right there. What I really love about it is that whenever we have a work that is inspired by something else, there can be a tendency where it feels like parody. We don't really get that here. This feels truly like its own unique thing that takes inspiration from something that the author has a love and passion for, which I really enjoyed because it never felt like it was stealing from Legend of Zelda concept. It never felt like it was just being unoriginal at all. It just felt like, I love this series and I'm inspired by it and I want to make my own thing using that as a muse. And I think that translates very well. There are a few Easter eggs and little secrets here and there that kind of point to video games as a whole. A few just nods to gaming culture. I think those are interwoven very well in the sense that if you know, you know. And if you don't know, I don't think you'd feel like you're missing out on something. I think that they are interwoven well enough that they don't completely break anything if you don't already, like, if you're not in on the joke. So some of the major highlights that I have from this, I really like the pacing of it. It is fast when it needs to be fast. It is slow when it needs to be slow. And I think that one of the biggest strengths is in taking its time in slower moments. I love the characters in here because we really get a deep dive into who they are, their motivations, without the full hand being played. There's still mystery. We get several chapters that are from the perspective of different characters. We get a perspective from the prince. We get a perspective from the princess. We get a perspective from the king. We get a perspective from the villain multiple times. We get the perspective of random characters on the villain's ship. And that's just kind of neat. It gives little zoom-ins to different parts of what's going on in the story and giving different opinions, different thoughts from different characters. And it makes all of the characters feel a bit more alive and like we really get and understand what they're doing without knowing too terribly much because the perspective keeps shifting. Another key thing that I loved were the action scenes. I think that Stephen has a real talent for writing action scenes. I get the sense that he just understands, like, it's going to sound weird. I think he understands, like, how bodies work. I think he understands how, like, the physicality and how movement actually works with the human body. One of the events that made me think that early on was that it was describing why Aldez is talented with a sword. And was, like, explaining how whenever someone initially picks up a sword, they start just, like, swinging with their arm. But Aldez realized very quickly that he gets more force with the rotation of the hip when he swings. And that's like how it works in combat sports. Whenever you throw a punch, the force doesn't really come from the arm. Some people think like you just swing your arm to throw a punch. But really, the force behind it comes from the rotation of the hip. So I think just having like base knowledge of how that actually works allows him to write very dynamic, engaging fight scenes and action scenes that in this fantastical world feels very grounded and real. And they were some of my favorite parts of the story. Now, something that I also really liked, that it might be like figments of my imagination or it's good writing. I'm not too sure yet because the book ends with a cliffhanger implying a sequel, which I'm really hoping for a sequel because there are mysteries that still need answers in my brain. And I got a sense kind of throughout the whole story, like I had this sense of there is something not right here. I'm getting a sense of like maybe we're not the good guys. I'm getting a sense of there's just something off. And I was kind of right near the end. There was a huge plot twist where I was like, I didn't see that particular thing coming, but I got a sense that there was something up here. So, I mean, he does a good job of like planting those seeds. You know, you got to have, hints to a twist, otherwise the reader feels cheated. It's a good twist, didn't feel cheated. Good job. I really want the sequel because I want to know if some of my other thoughts I was having are also going to get a payoff. And if I'm correct about the world and like you're just doing a good job of writing things in a way that feel like there is a dark underbelly to the story, or if I'm just imagining things, I got no idea. So those are the major things that I really like, but I do have a few nitpicks about this story. The main thing is that it's a fantasy story, and it's taking place in its own world, but there are a few instances where the prose doesn't seem to fit, like the verbiage. There was an instance where the narrator likened an event in the story to Russian roulette. And that pulled me out for a second because I'm like, we're in a fantasy world where, to my knowledge, Russia doesn't exist, nor do guns with which to play Russian roulette. There's also an instance where they referenced samurai, and I'm like, Japan's not really here. Maybe have a group of soldiers from a particular town that are inspired by samurai, but call them something else, just to make it feel more cohesive with the world. There was also something that I just thought was kind of weird. And it could just be my brain not being able to let certain things go, but it was just kind of weird. There was like a paragraph or two where we got the inspiration for the name of like the main antagonist. And it involved like using I think it was Ares and the Egyptian god Ra, but it was like all these different things from real world religions and concepts. And I find that interesting. I think that's really cool. I like knowing where authors come up with the names for things. I don't know why it's in the story itself. It doesn't do anything for the story. This feels more like information I would seek out in like an interview with the author, where it's like, oh, it's really cool to know how the author came up with that name, but I don't understand why that's a part of the story. And that's just a personal thing. And granted, it was like 2 paragraphs, and my brain can like latch on to things sometimes in a weird way, so that just might be an issue with me. But yeah, just little moments like that. And then also, like, I think one of the characters even refers to Poseidon, where it's like the ship was taken by Poseidon, something along those lines. And I'm like, I'm sorry, the Greek god Poseidon? That's in our world. Little things like that where there's just an occasional reference to our world within the story that just kind of break my immersion, and the world building just kind of felt like it fell apart a little bit from that. The story I really enjoyed, but the world around the story had a few little chinks like that, where it's like, perhaps make your own pantheon of gods for this world, so you don't just say Poseidon and then make me think like the Greek god Poseidon that tormented Odysseus. I just watched the Odyssey. Aside from those minor nitpicks, overall I really enjoyed Myth of Aldez. Aldez is an engaging protagonist. He's really easy to root for, showcasing a real drive to improve without getting frustrated at failures, and takes them as a learning opportunity. So I think that's a really good theme of personal growth and being driven to achieve your goals, and also the fact that you need to leave your comfort zone sometimes, and just having those themes of having to sacrifice sometimes for the greater goal that you're trying to achieve, and how that's not always an easy thing, but you need to get out of your comfort zone and go for that anyway. So I really like that theme that's kind of baked in there. So outside of those few little gripes that I have with a bit of world building that felt kind of shaky to me, I definitely do recommend it. I think the story is very well written. The action scenes are great. Love the characters. They all feel very dynamic and interesting. Love those moments where we just get like a whole chapter that's just their own internal monologue. Love moments like that. So I definitely do recommend this. Looking forward to a sequel if that's in the works. But if you have read it or are planning to read it, let me know your thoughts down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.